friends, welcome back to the Infinite Library, and today we are doing what I believe is the 5th part of Reading the Goodreads Choice Award of 2023 project. So this one is going to be an interesting one. I purposely left this for Spooky Month in October, and I purposely left the genre of horror for this month, and my random wheel generator has paired it with debut, of which there are some horror in there, and I'm in the mood. So, without further ado, let us go and have a look at which books I'm going to be picking to read for this video. Okay, so we are going to actually begin with the best debut novel, because this actually has a lot from other genres, and there are books that I've kind of already earmarked that are going to be in other genres that I either want to keep to those genres or ones that I'm sneakily taking out of those genres because they're ones I still kind of want to read. So the winner of debut novel was Wayward by Amelia Hart. This is also the winner of historical fiction, however, so I'm not going to read this because I'm already going to be reading it when I do historical fiction, which I believe is going to be in November. So that means I automatically have to read the next book in here. I think this is in the fantasy category maybe, but it's not really one I was super bothered about for the fantasy category because there are so many options that are really good that I do want to read. But this does mean I'm going to commit to read the runner-up for this. Yeah, there we go. It's nominated for Best Fantasy. I don't really know very much about this book, to be honest. I feel like it's something that I hadn't really heard about until it was in these awards, and now I'm seeing it a lot everywhere in like the shops, but I really don't know a damn thing about what this is about. This is a standalone, which is nice. I was about to say it's a debut. Of course it's a debut. This is the debut category. It is about two estranged half-sisters tasked with guarding their family's library of magical books. Ooh, okay, that sounds good actually. So it is a tale of familial loyalty and betrayal and the pursuit of magic and power. So all magic comes with a price, and for years the sisters have been separated. Esther has fled to a remote base in Antarctica to escape the fate that killed her own mother, and Joanna's isolated herself in their family home in Vermont, devoting her life to the study of these cherished volumes. So their father dies suddenly whilst Joanna is reading a book she has never seen before, and the sisters must reunite to protect their family legacy. That actually sounds a lot more interesting than I thought it was going to be. Like, this title just doesn't inspire me, I've got to say, and the title doesn't really inspire me, but it actually sounds pretty good. So yeah, this is definitely going to be the first one that I read then for debut. Next, we have two books that I think were in the fiction category, and I remember not being particularly interested in either of these, as is evidenced by the fact that neither of them are on my want to read. The September House. This is a horror. So the thing is that although I'm very interested to read this, I also don't want to read more than one of the same genre for this thing, because otherwise it feels like I'm just doing the genre category again. And there's another horror that's in here that I want to pick specifically for debut novel. So I'm vetoing that one straight away, basically. Looking for Jane, I think that is another historical. Let's have a quick look at it. About three women whose lives are bound together by a long lost letter. It takes place in 1980, 1971 and 2017. It wasn't one that I'm particularly interested in, to be honest, but we'll keep it as an option for now. Then we have Adelaide. This I think is to do with, is this the sequel to The Colour Purple? So is it a sequel in like name only? Maybe not. I might have just made that entire thing up, I think. Let's read what it's about then in that case. For 26-year-old Adelaide Williams, an American living in dreamy London, meeting Rory Hughes like a lightning bolt out of the blue. This looks like it's a romance. Okay. Also about mental health. It's classed as literary fiction, but it wasn't in any of the other categories, funnily enough. So he has a tragedy and she's trying to hold him together. I'm not massively interested in that one, I've got to say. So I'm going to not pick that one. Did you hear about Katie Carr? This one is also historical. We're getting a lot of historical in here. This is giving me Evelyn Hugo vibes. This is about a woman called Kitty Carr Tate, who was a white icon of the Silver Creek screen. She dies and bequeaths her multi-million-dollar estate to the St. John sisters, three young, wealthy black women. It prompts questions lots of questions. So it's about that, I guess, and digging into the past. It does actually sound quite interesting. I am intrigued. In fact, I'm more intrigued by this one than I am about Looking for Jane. And they're both historical, so we're gonna get rid of Looking for Jane. Okay, The Bandit Queens. This one does actually sound really interesting. Is this the fantasy category? Or like oh, isn't any others? I've heard about this one though. This is like a mystery, and basically the main woman is called Geeta. Her husband disappears and everyone thinks that she's killed him, and then I think everyone sort of starts coming to her in the village asking her to get rid of their husbands. It sounds really funny. It is actually one that I do want to read, so it's gonna be an option. Chain Gang All Stars. I don't think I'm picking this one because I think this is actually one that I'm gonna put in for the sci-fi category instead, so we're not picking that one. I think I remember The Collected Regrets of Clover. Is this a fiction? Yes, it was in the nominee for Best Fiction. I don't even remember what this one's about, but it wasn't one that I was interested in reading back then, so I'm gonna not pick it now. Beyond That, The Sea. This is another historical fiction. Let's see if it can beat Did You Hear About Kitty Carr? A sweeping, tender-hearted love story. Beyond That, The Sea tells the story of two families living through World War II on opposite sides of the Atlantic Ocean, and the shy, irresistible young woman who will call them both her own. That already has lost me, quite honestly. So goodbye. Oh, Shark Heart. I did want to read that one. I was really torn. I kind of wanted to pick this when it was in the fiction. This is the one about the guy who starts turning into a shark, basically. Magical realism. It sounds really interesting. That's a pretty high contender, not gonna lie, because I really do want to read that. But then we have In Memoriam. Is this actually a memoir? No, this is historical fiction again. God, there's so much historical fiction in here. It's about two young men who... Oh, wait, I've seen it. I've seen this cover of it before. I've heard really good things about this, and about how even though this is like a World War I and it is a sad, tragic ending, I believe, it's still supposed to be quite good, and it is actually one I'm interested in. Let's switch it to the cover that I've seen everywhere, because this cover is not it. That's what I want to read, because I do want to read it. So that's another history. That is an option. River Sing Me Home. What is this? Another historical fiction. Damn. Okay, there's so much in historical fiction. This is about a plantation in Barbados. The master gathers the slaves and announces that the king has decreed an end of slavery, but he says that they are now his apprentices. And basically, even though they're no longer his slaves, it looks like they are still stuck with him and they can't leave, and must work for him for 6 years. And one of the women runs. She begins a desperate search to find her children, the 5 who survived birth and were sold. This sounds really emotional. It sounds like a lot, to be honest. I actually do want to read this. It sounds interesting. But I feel like it's not quite hooking me as much as Kitty Carr or In Memoriam is. So, also, not gonna lie, I don't know about Bandit Queens. I think this one's gonna be more of an amusing one, and I don't know if that's what I'm feeling. Okay, Banyan Moon. This is also historical. Anne Trine gets a call that her fiercely beloved grandmother Min has passed away. Her life is already at a crossroads. In the years since she's last seen Min, Anne has built a seemingly perfect life, a beautiful lake house, a charming professor boyfriend, Oh, and she's pregnant. So she returns home to Florida to face her estranged mother Huang. I guess it's about these two reconnecting, it kind of sounds like. And we're also going back into grandmother's, like, story. Actually sounds quite interesting. I think I do want to read that. There's so much historical fiction. It is insane. Let me just check historical fiction quickly, because I obviously don't want to accidentally read whatever is the runner-up. Okay, Covenant of Water was the runner-up. How far down? Oh, this one's really far down. So is River Sing Me Home. And these two are much higher. So I feel like I should, if I'm gonna go for historical, I should probably pick the one that is the highest. Why did Memorial wasn't even classed in the historical fiction category, funnily enough. It's only in the debut novel category. Okay, last 3. There's one less because it turns out one of the books was actually a book that the author had written before under a pen name, so it didn't class as a debut. I've forgotten what it is. I'll put over here somewhere what it actually was, because I remember it being one that I think I did actually like. Okay, here we go. This is the one I think I want to read from this category. It's also in horror, but there's so much I want to read in horror. But this is like one of the only debuts. This in the September House, but this is the one I'm really excited about. This is Monstrillo by Gerardo Simano Cordova. And it's a literary horror. Basically, it's queer as well, which I love. But basically, it's about a mother who her son has died, and she like cuts out a piece of his lung, and it kind of grows, and it gets really weird and creepy, and it just sounds really good. So I'm gonna be definitely taking that one for sure. So that means we've got Monstrillo and Inkblood Sister Scribe so far. Okay, last two. I keep my exoskeletons to myself. It's had like one of the lowest votes as well, which is insane. Okay, this one I've heard a lot about as well. Sci-fi. So this is about a very similar United States that has a new sort of law enforcement, but corruption and prejudice run rampant. Oh, people are given a second and sometimes third, fourth and fifth shadow as a reminder of their crime. Ooh, that sounds good. And we're following someone called Chris, who is a new mother and who has a shadow. She's grieving the loss of her wife. Ooh, this sounds good. I'm going to add it to my to-read. And she's struggling, basically. I thought this was actually really short, but it's not. But I've heard really good things about this one. But it got such a low rating in the debut, which I'm quite surprised about. Keep it as an option. Okay, and the last one is a romance, which didn't make it to the romance category. One Summer in Savannah by Tara Shelton Harris. It's been 8 years since Sarah Lancaster left her home in Savannah, Georgia. 8 years since her daughter Alana came into this world, following a sexual assault. So her father falls ill, so she's helping him run his bookstore. Oh, and she's... this looks like it's going back into the whole thing of what happened to her and her assault, which I'm not massive on. So we're definitely not going to read that one. Okay, so we have Inkblood, we have Monstrillo. I have 5 to pick from. 2 are historical fiction, 1 is a mystery, and the other is sci-fi, and a magical realism. I'm not super drawn to reading this right now, so I'm going to get rid of Bandit Queens. I may keep this one for the sci-fi category, to be honest, so I'm going to get rid of I Keep My Exoskeletons to Myself, even though I feel like I would love it. So we have the 2 historicals and Shark Heart, which sounds really weird. And it's October, so I'm kind of here for really weird. Yeah, I think I'm going to go with Shark Heart. As always, if I start one of these and I decide that it's not really working for me, I'll probably pick up In Memoriam. Then, which also isn't in any other category. This one has a chance to be picked for historical, so we'll get rid of it. But yeah, I think that is my 3 options in that case. We're going to be reading Inkblood Sister Scribe, Monstrillo, and Shark Heart. I'm excited. They all sound really good. Let's do this. Okay, moving on to the horror category, which is going to be difficult because it's the category that I basically want to read everything from. I probably will end up coming back at some point and reading the remaining ones that I don't read here. So the winner with a landslide, because of course every time Stephen King has a new book, it's always going to end up being the winner of this category, annoyingly, even if it's not necessarily the best one, is Holly by Stephen King. I'm very torn about this. I remember not being very happy at all when I found out this was in the horror category, because I thought this was a mystery thriller, and I thought it should have belonged in the mystery thriller category, not horror, because I thought this was just like detective fiction. And I've actually since read like one of the Holly Gibney books in preparation, because I knew that I was going to have to do this. I read If It Bleeds, which is a novella collection, and I think If It Bleeds is the one that is Holly's story, and there is actually a supernatural element to this. It's more in like the Silence of the Lambs sort of horror with a slight supernatural bent than it is what I would class as typical horror, but it is enough that I guess it does class as being in the horror genre. I didn't love If It Bleeds, and I didn't necessarily really love Holly as a character. She runs a detective agency. She first appeared, I think, in Mr. Mercedes, and she had her own story, I think, in The Outsider, which If It Bleeds kind of related to. But I wasn't like in love with it, but it's the winner, so I will read it. So in this story, a woman called Penny calls the agency looking for help locating her missing daughter. Holly's reluctant to accept the case because her mother's just died. I remember they had a very complicated relationship. Holly's supposed to be on leave and her partner, Pete, has COVID. Oh, she didn't have a partner in the book that I read, so that's definitely new. But she ends up going to look into this anyway, and it looks like it's something to do with these two professors that are hiding a secret in their basement. So it doesn't necessarily grip me, but I'm gonna read it because it's the winner. And I do like Stephen. I say this sounding like I don't like Stephen King. I really like Stephen King. I just wasn't necessarily really drawn in by the holy book that I did read. It was just fine. So, moving on. The runner-up I've already read, which is How to Sell a Haunted House. I gave it 4 stars, although I'm just going to re-rate that now because I feel like it was more of a 3-star for me. It was not my favourite of Grady Hendrix's, but it also wasn't the one I liked the least. It was just okay. Okay, next. T. Kingfisher. I have heard a lot about this series. I've read T. Kingfisher before. I've only read one of her horrors before, which was the Twisted Ones, I think. And I read some of her different fantasies, and I liked all of them a lot. So this is a very strong contender. It hasn't got the best rating anymore, to be honest. It's dropped down, and I have heard mixed things about it. But this is it's a haunted house book. So basically, it's about a woman, a girl, I don't know how old she is to be honest from this, but she goes back to her parents' house and things are weird. Her mother is like jumping at noises. It seems to be like there's something else in the house, and there is vultures in the garden. So she tries to find out what her mum is so frightened about, and she has to go digging for the truth. It's not massively long either, which is nice. I do have potentially quite a busy October, so that is tempting to me that it's a shorter book. And I like T. Kingfisher, so I think this is probably going to be my second choice. And here's where it gets difficult, because I want to read all of these except not Monstrilio, because I've already picked this one for debut novel. Okay, let's go through them one by one. So we have Vampires of El Norte, which I've heard is more of a romance than a horror, to be honest. It's historical fiction about a girl called Nena, who's the daughter of a rancher in 1840s Mexico, and there is a guy who is a vampire who I think she ends up falling for. Oh, okay, this guy actually sounds like he is someone who attacked her years ago, which sounds kind of icky. So I don't know if I'm vibing with that right now. I want to read all these, but not sure. Rouge. I loved Bunny by Mona Awad. So this is also a very tempting one. In fact, there are 2 books here that are about the beauty industry. We have Rouge, and we also have, I think it's rated further down, Natural Beauty by Ling Ling Huang, and both of them are very similar. But for Rouge, this one is about a dress shop clerk whose mother's unexpected death, I think, makes her get a new job. Yeah, her mother's got lots of debts, and she is apparently approached at the funeral by someone who's kind of sharing clues about her mother's demise. Ooh, and it's to do with this strange spa. With the help of a pair of red shoes, that's very Wizard of Oz, Belle is lured into the barbed embrace of La Maison de Medusa. This cult spa that her mother was devoted to, apparently. Ooh, this sounds really good. That's a very strong contender, I think. My Darling Girl by Jennifer McMahon. This is more of a psychological thriller, I think. A woman who, after taking in her dying alcoholic mother, begins to suspect demon possession is haunting her family. And it's set at Christmas. This sounds like it's going to be more of a drama, to be honest. I'm intrigued by the demon possession, but not a lot else about this is really kind of vibing. Although, it's set at Christmas, I might read this at Christmas, so I think I'm just going to take it off because this might be a Christmas book for me. The Timber House. This is also in the debut category. This is another haunted house story from what I can remember. Basically it's about this woman called Margaret. Every September the walls drip blood, and Margaret decides that regardless of the haunting, she is not leaving. It looks like she's been there for a while potentially, but it sounds like almost like, from what I've heard, not all of these ghosts are like malicious, and it even says here that like, they're terrified of something that lurks in the basement. So I am very intrigued by this one, but if I'm gonna be reading The House with Good Bones, that's 2 haunted house books, and I think I would rather spread out the storylines a little bit, so I'm going to veto it. Silver Nitrate is one I actually own, and I am very intrigued by this one. It's by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, and this is like about horror movies and this director who has like a cursed film. It was the first ever Night book, I believe, that Ellie McRae did. and I am really intrigued by this one. But do I want to read it for this? I don't know. It does sound really interesting. We'll put it as an option. Then we have what I think is probably the longest book, Our Share of Night by Mariana Enrique. I really do want to read this one as well, but it isn't actually exactly what I thought it was going to be about. I think I've been mixing this up with Silver and Nightfall a lot. And this is about a father and a son who are on a road trip after their mother dies. They travel to an ancestral home where they must confront a terrifying legacy. Oh, it sounds like a haunted house thing again then. Oh, and there's a cult who the son is, it looks like, he's being brought into this cult basically, and we're going back and forth in time from the 1960s in London to the brutal years of Argentina's military dictatorship. This sounds really interesting, but I know this is a massive tome, and because it's so big and it sounds like it's going to be very complex, I feel like it's not one I want to read super fast. So I think I've still got a really high rating there, by the way, 4.28, but I think I'm not going to pick this one, even though I do really want to read it. Lone Woman by Victor Laval. This one is about homesteading, from what I believe. It was set around this time when I think they basically like gave people land for free as long as they could like farm it and tame it, and I don't think they got any help with it. And in this book, this woman who does this is called Adelaide, and she has a mysterious enormous steamer trunk. When the trunk opens, people around Adelaide start to disappear. Does sound really interesting. I like the setting. I think it sounds really unusual, so I'm going to put that as an option. Black Sheep by Rachel Harrison. I've not read by her before. Though she has written, I want to read her books, but I also don't know if they're books that are for me. I think this is a cult one. Yes, this is about a woman called Vesper. She's basically like escaped her very religious family. Goes back basically because of an invitation to a wedding of her cousin who she really loves, and it's being hosted at the family farm. And this kind of sounds a bit like Midsummer. Not gonna lie. I am very intrigued by this, but I'm also seeing that the rating has dropped a lot, and I've heard very mixed things about it. So I think just because I suspect it's probably not going to be a good contender for this list, I'm not going to pick it. Then we have Mr. Magic by Kirsten White. I have actually read by Kirsten White before. I read Hyde, which I quite enjoyed. But also, it wasn't like the best book ever. It was just kind of like a good time of a book. So I don't really know if I want to risk reading another Kirsten White for this. And this one does sound really interesting though. It's all about this like children's program, and it's about these like surviving cast members, and they meet up again, and I guess there's some kind of weird thing that happens essentially. I don't trust that it's going to be amazing, so I'm not going to pick that one. Right, Don't Fear the Reaper. This is the second book in the Indian Lake trilogy by Stephen Graham Jones. I haven't read the first book yet, which I believe is called My Heart is a Chainsaw, so I'm not going to read this because I've not read the first one. The Reformatory is very tempting as well. I've heard really good things about this one. This is about a reform school, and this boy called Robbie who it gets basically sent there, and the school is like weird. Robbie has a talent for seeing ghosts. Boys are forced to work to remediate their so-called crimes, and they're going missing, and Robbie is trying to work out what's happening. Meanwhile, his older sister is rallying every family member and connection in Florida to find a way to get Robbie out before it's too late. This one sounds really interesting as well. This is definitely a contender. And Natural Beauty, this is the other thing that's about beauty, obviously. Similar to Rouge, this one is about a woman who ends up working at this high-end wellness store in New York City. Again, because she needs money. It's quite funny how both of those are like, the woman has to go into the beauty industry because they are struggling for money. And I think with this, like she starts using the products, and it starts changing her, and it's sinister, and like the stuff in the products that's really weird. It's a higher rating actually. This is a 3.8. Rouge is a, ooh, that has dropped. I want to read Rouge more though, just because it's Mona Allard. So even though this is a very strong contender, and it would be like one of my options, because I think I want to read Rouge more. In fact, me saying that basically means that I think I may have chosen Rouge. But well, yeah, I'm not going to pick this one for this, even though I also want to read it. Sisters of the Lost Nation by Nick Medina. This is a Native American horror. It's also a mystery. Girls begin to go missing on the reservation. Her own little sister disappears. So it's part gripping thriller and part mythological horror. It does sound interesting, but I kind of feel like I know where it's going. So yeah, I'm not Not quite vibing with it. Okay, so we have a detective paranormal, and we have a haunted house story. Okay, last 4. Monstrilio, I've already said. I picked this for debut, so I'm not going to be picking it for this. Then we have, I think this is actually a sequel as well. Yeah, this is a sequel, Becoming the Boogeyman to the Boogeyman. This is about true crime obsessions, I believe. But I've not read the first book, so I'm not going to be picking it. Then we have the last 2, which is, I'll just open them both up to have a look at them. But they are like right at the bottom. So I don't know if they're ones I'll pick for this, to be honest. Her Little Flowers is a horror mystery about a woman called Francine who has lived basically all her life in her family's ancestral home, an Elizabethan manor in the Lake District. And there are ghosts, particularly one who is a ghost girl who has been her companion. And then her estranged sister returns to the manor, bringing a story that threatens everything Francine has always believed in. This is another haunted house book, basically, so I'm not going to pick it. It also doesn't sound massively interesting, to be honest. And then Dead 11. This is the 90s one, which I've heard very mixed things about. I've heard that a lot of people didn't like this, but I am intrigued by it. Basically, it's about someone who goes to this island, and I think everything is like stuck in a certain day. Yeah, it's like a Groundhog Day kind of thing. So this woman called Willow goes there because her deceased son has like the name of the island on the floor, basically. So she goes out to find the island. Oh, and then she disappears. Okay, that is, I feel like that's a massive spoiler. That it basically says that she goes, it has this whole premise about her going there, and then it's like, oh, and she disappears, and then someone else comes to look for her. Threw me off a little bit, to be honest. Because it's the last one, although I am intrigued, I just think there are better options for me to pick. So, I now have 4 options to pick from, other than Holly and A House of Good Bones. We have Rouge, which is the creepy cult beauty spa. We have Silver Nitrate, which is cursed horror film, which does sound right up my alley, not gonna lie. Lone Women, which is the one about the homesteading and the woman who's odd. And The Reformatory, which is the one about scary things going on at the reform school. I feel like that could be classed as a haunted house. So because I've already got one, even though I really do want to read this, like I feel this is a very strong contender, I'm not going to pick it. Which one am I most drawn to? I'm not feeling Lone Women, so that leaves us to Rouge and Silver Nitrate. I think I'm most excited by Rouge, so I think that's going to be my 3rd one, but if I'm kind of not vibing with it, then I'll have Silver Nitrate as a backup. So those are my horror picks. I don't want to say they're solid because I'm really not convinced I'm going to like Holly, but I do think I have a very good chance of loving both the Tea Kingfisher and the Rouge. Like, funnily enough as well, I picked authors that I've read from all of them before for this. So that's interesting. But yeah, that's the horror books. Hello, so I have all of the books now for this month's challenge. Some of them are ones that I've been slowly gathering over the year because they're just ones I wanted to get anyway. One, funnily enough, just arrived the other day that you may have seen in an unboxing video, and the rest are library books. So we have our horror picks. So we have Stephen King, Holly, it's on the chunky side. We have Rouge by Mona Awad. I bought this one. And recently I got A House of Good Bones by Tea Kingfisher. These 2 are on the shorter side, I think. It's just Holly that's kind of chunky. And then I also have the debut books here as well. So I have Inkblood Sister Scribe by Emma Torres. This is also kind of chunky, to be honest. I have Monstrilio, which the UK cover is so different from the American cover, but I'm really excited to read this. And I have Shark Heart, A Love Story, which I got out from the library. So that's all the books, and I don't know what I'm going to start with. I'm pretty excited, to be honest. All of these sound reasonably exciting to me, apart from maybe Inkblood Sister Scribe, and I'm not sold on Holly, but it's Stephen King, so I think I will still like it. This one, I'm still amazed this is like such a high rating, and I'm just not sold on that I'm actually going to like it or not, but it got high ratings, so I guess I give it a chance. So I am coming at you with an update, and I haven't actually updated you whilst I was reading Holly because I've actually already finished it now. I was away when I was reading this and there just wasn't really a good time for me to like stop and be able to record anything. So I read the whole thing. I read it in like 2 days, I think, and I didn't love this, unfortunately. Like, I like a lot of Stephen King books, but this one just didn't really work for me, unfortunately. So Holly is basically, I would say honestly, it's more of a mystery detective story than it is a horror book. If we're classing stuff like Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal as horror, it would fall into that category, I suppose. But there isn't anything supernatural going on in this book, which there is in the previous books. So I would say those would class more in the horror category, but honestly, I don't think this really classes as horror. Let's start with what I thought about it, I guess. Overall, I gave this a 3-star. This was not a bad book, don't get me wrong, but for Stephen King, having read a lot of his, this is probably one of the worst I've read, quite honestly. It was well written. The pacing was a little slow at times, I think. There was a lot of... The part of the issue with this book, I think, is that you find out, basically right at the beginning, exactly what's happening, who the killers are, what they're doing, kind of why they're doing it as well, a little bit. And you keep seeing them throughout the whole story. It goes back in time a lot, basically with them getting all the victims, whilst Holly is also kind of finding out about who all the victims are and working out that it's more than just a girl who's gone missing. There is actually a pattern here and there's a bunch of people who've gone missing. And it's a little bit frustrating because you already know exactly who it is and you're just kind of waiting for Holly to play catch up. And it takes her quite a while to get to the point where waiting for her to put the pieces together. And it also has this really frustrating thing where like she usually works with a group of people and they do show up in this, but whether it's because of the fact that this is set during a pandemic, so they're all stuck in different places. For example, her partner Pete got COVID, so he's isolating, that's fine. I have no issue with the fact that that was a thing, but like the other two were obviously all kind of not really being together, but they all were very caught up in like their own stuff that was happening in their life, which, don't get me wrong, I liked seeing more about their personal lives and like learning a bit more about them and what made them tick, I guess. I found it a lot more interesting, particularly with Barbara, because she has a whole thing where she's writing poetry and she starts getting a mentor. So I enjoyed all that stuff, but the issue is that they were also peripherally kind of involved in the investigation. Like Holly will reach out to them and ask them to like look into stuff for her, and most of the time they're just too busy to get back to her, or they're too caught up. I understand why, particularly in Barbara's case, where she gets really caught up and she just doesn't respond to Holly, but it's kind of frustrating as well because they have some like important pieces of information that they just don't tell Holly until like way too late in, and it's very frustrating because you're just like, could you just send her the information and then she's like gonna wrap this up quicker, basically. So I found that very annoying. It made the whole book a lot slower paced than I think it needed to be. This was not like a quick paced read. It was very tense, but I think because of that, it was definitely slower paced. So I know some other issues with this book that people have are not personally issues that I have with it. So basically, Stephen King does write this in the pandemic. It was like during the Delta thing is kind of like where he sets this. And it's very like obvious all the way through that this is during a pandemic. Every couple of pages, every time she meets someone, everyone will talk about it. They'll check in with each other, being like, are you vaxxed? Talks about masking, that kind of thing. Basically seeing other people's, you know, if they believe in it, if they don't believe in it, that kind of thing. And there's an awful lot of political stuff in here as well because it is just post-Trump administration, and you kind of see that a lot as well with the politics. And I personally didn't really mind that because it honestly really helped ground the book for me, and it helped keep up that atmosphere of isolation as to why Holly is basically investigating this whole thing all by herself. And a lot of people found this really annoying, I think, and was just like, oh, he's just spouting his politics all over the place. Stephen King basically this is. And honestly, I just kind of see this as being very realistic for how it was during the time. If you're gonna set something during the pandemic, commit to it, and I think Stephen King did. Like, it's not just that Holly will occasionally put a mask on when she's talking to people. Like, it is embedded all the way through, and particularly because Holly herself is a hypochondriac, and her mother, not a spoiler because it literally happens at the start of the book, but her mother passes away from COVID and she didn't believe that it was real. So it makes sense why this like spectre of the disease is all the way through this book, very present. And I don't necessarily like how it's kind of used as a way to be like person bad, person good, because it's like, oh, if they believe in protecting themselves from COVID, then person good. And if they don't, then person evil. So that was a little bit heavy-handed, I think. But also, I think when you were living through that time, it really did kind of feel like that a little bit. Like if you were very paranoid, then having someone who was so averse and not believing in it was kind of terrifying. I don't think it was like seen as an unnecessary thing, because I think this is a very accurate depiction of how it felt to live through the pandemic. And maybe people find that very uncomfortable and they don't want to read about that, which is what I kind of saw in a lot of reviews, that they were like, I just want fiction and I don't want to read about it. But like, if you're going to choose to do this, do it. So I didn't have an issue with that. What I did have an issue with was some of the themes, unfortunately. I didn't mind the whole thing with Holly kind of struggling with grief throughout the whole thing and her problematic mother. I thought that was fine. I certainly identified in a certain way with some of the stuff that she was dealing with. The main issues I had was with the choice of victims that are picked in this book. Once again, like in It, spoilers if you want to just skip forward to this point, then do that. I'm just going to briefly go into the identities of the victims. There's nothing other spoilery about it. But basically, like in It, the first person that you see brutally, not really murdered, but you see them being taken and you're not really sure what happens to them at that point, but the first person who is taken, and it's very clear that this is a personally motivated kidnapping, that part of why they're doing this is due to their identity, is a gay man. And then this kind of carries on with the other victims, and it's very clear that this is emotionally related kidnappings, that they are targeting these people because they kind of see them as people that they hate within society. So we have a black girl, we have a black girl who's a vegan, we have someone who's a junkie. The thing is that they make a whole point of being like, all these people are absolutely lovely, but these kidnappers hate them mostly because of how they perceive them. And it's just... I just really didn't like seeing that. Kind of plays into the fact that who these killers are, who is an old white academic rich couple, basically, and is making that point about how they look down on minority people. But I personally just didn't want to read about like that. I don't want to read about people who are like me, people who are minorities being taken and brutally murdered throughout the course of the whole book. So that was the issue I had, unfortunately. This really killed the enjoyment for me out of this. The enjoyment is a horror book, but you know what I mean? Like, I just don't want to see that. It disturbs me, it upsets me, it's the sort of stuff I don't want to see. And honestly, in this day and age, I don't want to see racially, sexually motivated murders based on their identity. We've had too much of that. So yeah, I just found that really disappointing. I wish that Stephen King had got a different part with that, because that just really just put me off the whole thing. Honestly, it just kind of took away the menace of the killers as well. It just made them seem kind of pathetic, and the scenes were horrible. It was just very clear that so much of it was just based in this judgmentalism that the two people had. And yeah, it just made them seem kind of pathetic, quite honestly. That was the issue I had with this. Spoilers end here, I guess. So yeah, that is one of the reasons really why I gave it a 3. I thought the pacing was a bit rubbish. It just took too long to get to the main point, is the issue. And overall, like, the themes and stuff just really didn't sit right with me, to the point where I just couldn't really enjoy this. Like, I read it fast because I was trying to finish it. And don't get me wrong, like, I was gripped by it, I guess. Like, I was interested in the investigation. Like, I obviously wanted Holly to find these people, which took way too long. And then, of course, the inevitable happens because she's working alone near the end. And I kind of did predict a lot of what was happening with it, which was a bit of a shame. So yeah, it was just kind of okay. And I don't think it's one I would ever pick up again, just because I feel like it just didn't sit well with me at all. So yeah, that is my thoughts on that. This was obviously the winner of the horror category. It's obviously not a winner with me. 3-star. I don't know if I want to say it's the worst Stephen King book I've read, because I've read a decent number, but I've not read loads of his work. I actually just go through which ones I've read. So let's see, I've done Carrie, Salem's Lot, The Stand, The Dead Zone. I'm halfway through it. I've seen films of a couple of them as well, which I haven't got to the book. So like I've seen Pet Sematary, I've seen Misery, I've seen Gerald's Game, but I've not read the books for them yet. I read From Reboot 8 obviously because I did that earlier this year. I've read a couple of the short story collections. I haven't read The Outsider, which is Holly's first book, which is a main character, I believe, but I did read If It Bleeds. And yeah, I've read a couple of his short story stuff, so I've read a decent amount, I would say, to be a fairly good judge at this point on how I feel about Stephen King. And yeah, honestly, apart from maybe some of the short stories just not really hitting, this is probably the worst book I've read by him. Not the best start, unfortunately. I am, however, now picked up the highest rated book, basically, from the debut novel category, which is Ink Blood Sister Scribe. I'm maybe 40 pages into that at the moment. I'm actually quite enjoying it so far. It's surprising me. I definitely went into this with very low expectations for no reason, really, other than that I think the cover and the title are kind of bland. But actually the story is quite interesting, so I'm enjoying my time with that so far, so hopefully I'll have a much more positive review for you once I get further into that. So yeah, my voice is going. Goodbye. So yeah, gonna have to deal with it being kind of awful lighting because it is only like 4:30 and it is so dark outside. It is absolutely pouring it down with rain. It's just very miserable. But also it's autumn and it's fall, so it's kind of giving the vibes a little bit. So I have put aside Ink Blood Sister Scribe for now because the library wants it back, but I'm actually quite enjoying it, so I've ordered my own copy of it, which should be arriving sometime the next week or so. But in the meantime, I have picked up another book, and that is Shark Heart, a love story. I am finally reading the Great White Shark book, and this is a really interesting read so far. Like, structurally, I'll say this is very interesting in terms of how the book is set out. Like, we have a lot of times where it's more like a set of vignettes, really, rather than chapters. Like, we're slowly going through a period of time and we're seeing things from both of the couple's perspective. And as you can see, sometimes we just have like really short things that are maybe only a few sentences or two. Other times we have slightly longer, but usually no more than like a few pages, to be honest. And we also have a lot of things that are set out like they're scenes in a play, which makes sense given the fact that one of our protagonists, Lewis, who is the man who was turning into a great white shark, is a playwright. And he teaches playwriting, and he's actually supposed to be kind of like throughout the course of this, presumably, writing this kind of story as a play. So I assume we're kind of seeing parts of his story as a play. So this book has a very interesting premise. Basically, it is about a man and woman. They have recently married, probably only a few months ago at this point, called Ren and Lewis. They're very different in terms of their personality. Ren is kind of like the methodical, business-like, less emotional of the two, and Lewis is like the dreamer, the creative person, the really emotional one, but they kind of complement each other really well. Basically, a few months after their wedding, he is diagnosed with, can I actually find the name of the condition? So interestingly, this is kind of like not a completely new thing that he gets. It's a type of mutation. Here we go. It's Carcharodon-Carcharias mutation, which basically means he is turning into a great white shark. And whilst it is still kind of seen as rare in this world, it is definitely something that is kind of a little bit more understood, and they have treatment for it. Although at the end of the day, for what this is doing, there is no cure. It essentially is that he is going to no longer be a human and he will become a great white shark. And he will probably, I imagine, like forget everything about his human life and just live as a great white shark eventually. Like, they're saying that, you know, gradually over the course of a couple of months, his body is going to change. His mind is going to change. He's going to start taking on all of the attributes, both physically and mentally, of this like deep sea predator. And then eventually he's just going to have to be released into the ocean, but only when he is able to live as a shark in the ocean. So in the meantime, he is just trying to still live his life and is kind of being also like looked after by Ren as he is mutating. This has been a very quick read, as you can see, because of how short a lot of the chapters are, and it has been really engrossing as well. It's been really interesting seeing things from both of their points of view because they're very different, and seeing how they're both kind of dealing with the fact that like they've literally just got married or planning their life together. She was potentially considering about them having children, and now he's basically not going to be there in a couple of months' time. So it's obviously going to be a lot about grief, and we're starting to get to that point now where I'm at. I am just over 100 pages in, and it's basically done what it says in the plot, is that it's taken a turn for him in that he is kind of starting to lose control of himself and is acting more a bit on animal instinct. So he's kind of losing himself a little bit now. Before, it was kind of almost a little bit more like of an intellectual, interesting curiosity that we were seeing it through. Like, we were seeing both of their points of view, but they were both like kind of trying to keep going. You're starting to see Ren like struggling to cope with this, and Lewis like trying to cope with this diagnosis. And I think now it's hit the point where like there's obviously no turn back. It's becoming very real, and what we know of Lewis is probably not going to be there much longer. So now we're getting into like the grief stage, I think, of the book, and I feel like it's going to be pretty rough emotionally from here on out. But I am thoroughly enjoying this, I have to say. I might be taking a little bit of a break now just because I can feel like it's going to get heavy. I'm really enjoying this. This is such a weird premise. I want to say both of the characters are likable, but they're also not likable in some ways. Like, it's a very real portrayal, particularly of Ren. And Ren is someone who is maybe not like a super likable protagonist, but I find her really interesting. So yeah, it's a really weird book so far, but I am really quite enjoying it. It's quite easy to read, I have to say as well. I'm enjoying how quick and sharp everything is because everything is kind of cut up into small segments and we're just seeing bits and pieces, and because we keep going back and forth between their perspective, like at the moment at least, where we've been fairly even between Lewis and Ren, but I suspect we're probably more so going to be seeing more Ren's perspective as Lewis is becoming more of a shark, I guess. But yeah, that's where I'm at with this one. I'm having a good time with it. I'm liking it a lot. I'm glad I picked this one, to be honest, because it was one I was interested in the fiction category, but I did decide to bypass it at that time because it's fantasy, magical realism, sci-fi vibes a little bit. Also, it took me quite a long time to realise when I picked this book up that the whole shark on the cover is made of different flowers, which I think is lovely. Oh, also, another thing I wanted to mention is that we do have another person who's briefly shown up in the narrative, who I think is just called Tiny Pregnant Woman. And it's this woman who Ren meets, and it's showing like another side, I suppose, of how these mutations and stuff are affecting people in society, because she's like an ordinary human woman married to an ordinary human man, I suppose, and she's been trying to get pregnant for ages, and then she finally does get pregnant, and it turns out that what she's pregnant with is not human babies, it's twins, and they are eagles. So she is going to give birth to 2 baby birds, and there's a lot of medical complications with that. So we saw that a little bit, and they had this weird little toxic friendship for a while. It was interesting to see like another side of how this is affecting people in society, because at the moment it's just kind of like Lewis is an anomaly. So yeah, it's really interesting. It's probably going to break my heart a little bit, but I am having a good time with it so far. Okay, so I did indeed finish Shark Heart. I literally finished this the same day I read it. I just could not put this down. This was so engaging, and honestly, because it was like so short and fragmented, it was a really easy read as well. So yeah, I basically started it in the morning and finished it before I went to bed at night, reading periodically throughout the day. And I've had a few days to think about it because I really enjoyed this, and I wasn't sure where my rating sat for it, to be honest. I think I finally settled that this is going to be a high 4. It's not quite a 5. The first part of this and the epilogue part of this were my favourite parts in the book. I thought they were just brilliant. They were 5-star material for me. But we kind of have like a shift in narrator midway through, and whilst it is ultimately important where that story takes us, it kind of goes in a different track. It's just different from the original story we were expecting, and I wasn't expecting us to shift narrator completely, so that kind of threw me off a little bit. For me personally, I feel like, it's not that I feel like it was bad, I think it was still good. Like, I was still interested in what was happening in part 2 and also in part 3, which follows another narration which kind of definitely still links to the first narration, but I don't know if we needed it. For me at least, the first part and the epilogue were perfect. That for me, if it had just been that would have been a perfect book, I think. I really did enjoy this. I got really connected to the characters. It did get sad and tragic, but not so much, I think, that I had to stop reading. Like, I took a little bit of a break, and then I was okay, and I don't think it dwelled on it for too long, because then we did actually, because we switched the narrator, I guess, and that was totally different tone. So I guess it was good that it switched narrator, but yeah, I don't know, like, if it didn't go as tragic and dark as I was kind of worried it was going to, in terms of it just making me a sobbing mess. But overall, yeah, I did really enjoy this. I'm not entirely sure I needed those 2 sections in the middle that weren't from the original narrative, and that's probably a personal preference. Maybe those sections are like other people's favorites, but I just didn't really feel like I needed them, although like it did give a lot of understanding for our main girl Ren and what she went through, because it's kind of like to do with what happened to her in the past with her mother, but it's from her mother's perspective, and it did kind of link into the main narrative again. I say it helped us understand her, but it kind of felt like we were reading a totally different book. And then the one after that, I honestly just didn't think we needed it. It felt like it was done more for self-indulgence than for anything else, and to be like, yeah, it's okay, this is fine, look what happens. I wasn't crazy on that. I didn't think we needed that part at all. So I think that has changed my rating down to what could have been a 5-star, down to a mid to high 4, which is still a really good rating, to be honest. Is this the first debut books I've read? Yeah, it is, because I'm still waiting for my copy of Ink Blood to Describe to arrive, which actually, spoilers, I've got a few parcels that arrived today, which I'm going to open in a second, and I think that is one of the books in there, so I can carry it on now. Overall, this was really beautifully written. It was really lyrical. It was very poetic a lot of the time, I think, and I thought it was a really good book, but like, you have to kind of be on board with the fact that this is going to be a sad, tragic story about a man turning into a shark. It does it very thoughtfully and sympathetically, but there are definitely some like gut punch moments, particularly when he starts to truly like turn into the shark and he's like forgetting his human self, and those bits were like really heart-wrenching. Overall, I really did like this. I don't know if it's one I would ever pick up to reread again, to be honest, but I can definitely see why it's gotten as much acclaim as it has. And yeah, overall, I would say I definitely enjoyed this. I just felt that maybe there were some parts that just didn't need to be there. That is my review of that one, I guess, then. I'm probably going to go back and pick up Ink Plus to Describe next. And then I've got all the horror to read, which I'm very excited for, because this is the horror that I'm hoping I will enjoy more than the Stephen King book. Okay, so the bonus for you is that you get to have a bit of a book haul now. I have a couple of books that I've ordered for Yelp in here, and I also have at least one book which was a pre-order, which I had totally forgotten about and didn't know it was coming out now. I think one of these is probably from Vinted, I think, and then the others are all from Waterstones. Let's go with the smallest one first. Ooh, okay. This, I think, is the pre-order. Yes, it is. Okay. This is St. Gibson's. This is like a prequel kind of story to Evocation. It's called Odd Spirits, and this is primarily about Reese and Moira prior to the events of Evocation. Oh my gosh, there are pictures in here and it's gorgeous. Yeah, we've got some nice sprayed edges. Obviously it's like a really nice foiling kind of thing. This is like the Waterstone special edition. Ooh, okay, we have end papers as well of Reese and Moira, which is gorgeous. It's signed, which I actually didn't know it was going to be signed. Ooh, and we have more end papers on the back, which is very cool. So this is basically an event, I believe, that happened that was briefly talked about in evocation, but we actually get to see it. It's not very long, it is just a short story. It's like 100 pages. Really excited to read this because I really did like evocation. Next, I think we've got a vinted parcel. Oh no, this isn't a vinted parcel. Oh, enjoy the lighting change. My ring light just fell over. I've been trying to get hold of the Shauna Maguire books and I had a gift card, so I decided I would pick up another one. So I've got Lost in the Moment and Found. A lot of like the earlier numbered ones are just not available anymore, unfortunately. So this is one of the ones that was available, so I picked this up to add to the thing. I think it's book number 5 or 6. So none of these are vintage parcels as it happens. So this last one is another Waterstones parcel. This is a much bigger box than I feel like it needs to be for what this is. Yeah, it's only one book. Why is it in such a big thing? Okay, well, it's The Will of the Many by James Islington. I have wanted to read this. I've been trying to get it out from the library, but there's so many reserves, and then I finally did, and I read like a chapter of it, and I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna buy it, especially because I really want to have the main cover before they start changing all the covers. So yeah, I just bit the bullet, and again, because I had a Waterstones card voucher, I decided just to buy it. So yeah, I didn't actually get ink blisters described there, but that should be coming any day now. I'm excited to read this. It's got a map, which is very nice. So yeah, that's the book haul, I guess. Hello, so a very quick update. I have just started reading Rouge yesterday. I'm really not that far in because I've just not had time, to be honest. It's been really busy, but so far I am liking it. It's a little bit slow to get into, which I think I remember Bunny being a little bit slow to get into as well before like everything kicked off. But I am liking it so far. At the moment, we've got our main character, Mirabelle, also known as Belle, and she is kind of dealing with her grief, I suppose, because her mother has just passed away, but they had this really complicated relationship where it was kind of obvious that her mother was like really stunningly beautiful and she always saw herself as being inferior, and like her mum kind of made her feel like she was inferior in her appearance as well. Part of that is because she is half Arabic, but she is basically obsessed with her appearance, and like the only thing we see her doing in her spare time is literally just millions and millions of different skincare routines. I get that it's trying to make it seem like she's doing like a lot, so we just get these like huge paragraphs of like all the routines that she's doing, which is a little bit repetitious. I'm not too crazy on that, but I get what the author's trying to do here with it. So yeah, not a lot to say yet, but I am liking it. I'm definitely intrigued to see where it's gonna go. I'm gonna read more tonight. I'm actually heading out tonight to an event with an evening of R.F. Kuang, author of Yellowface, which you may have seen me review back in part 1. So that is quite fun. I'm really looking forward. I'm hoping she'll do some signings, so maybe I can get Yellowface signed. I'm not taking my absolute tome that is Babel along with me, but if she is doing signings and they have some books that you can buy, I may pick up the Poppy War because I really don't want to check that out. But yeah, book update, not very far. I'm liking it so far. Probably gonna try and finish it over the next couple of days, over the weekend most likely. And yeah, I guess here is the outfit. I have this cute little white dress with a black polo neck and of course yellow and gold accessories. So off I go.
Arrived totally composed and you wouldn't have known, and very casually just went, oh yeah, the train caught on fire.
Well, the worst part was I texted my husband, my train is on fire, and then forgot to text him back. A few minutes. People always describe jealousy as this sharp, green, venomous thing. Unfounded, vinegary, mean-spirited. But I found that jealousy to writers feels more like fear. Jealousy is the spike in my heart rate when I glimpse news of Athena's success on Twitter. Another book contract, awards nominations, special editions, foreign rights deals. Jealousy is constantly comparing myself to her and coming up short, is panicking that I'm not writing well enough or fast enough, that I am not and never will be enough. Jealousy means that even just learning that Athena is signing a 6-figure option deal with Netflix means that I'll be derailed for days, unable to focus on my own work, mired by shame and self-disgust every time I see one of her books in a bookstore display. Every writer I know feels this way about someone else. Writing is such a solitary activity. You have no assurance that what you're creating has any value, and any indication that you're behind in the rat race sends you spiraling into the pits of despair. Keep your eyes on your own paper, they say. But that's hard to do when everyone else's papers are flapping constantly in your face. Though I feel the vicious kind of jealousy too, watching Athena talk about how much she adores her editor, a literary powerhouse named Marlena who plucked me from obscurity and who just really understands what I'm trying to do on a craft level, you know. I stare at Athena's brown eyes, framed by those ridiculously large lashes that make her resemble a Disney forest animal, and I wonder, what is it like to be you? What is it like to be so impossibly perfect, to have every good thing in the world? And maybe it's the cocktails, or my overactive writer's imagination, but I feel this hot coiling in my stomach, a bizarre urge to stick my fingers in her mouth and rip her face apart, to neatly peel her skin off her body like an orange and zip it up over myself.
Hello, the lighting is terrible. It's like not even 5, but it is so gloomy outside. But I thought I'd update you because look what arrived in the post just now. So this is a secondhand copy, hardback copy. I actually really prefer the hardback, to be honest, to the softback in terms of the colouring, which is not like me, because usually I would always go for blue, I think it was, in the paperback over red, but I just really like the combo of this. And it's like basically in new condition, to be honest. I didn't pay very much for this, but yeah, I'm impressed by how good condition this is. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting back to this. I'm probably going to pick it up maybe after Rouge. I'm not much further in Rouge, to be honest, even though I took it with me for travelling last night for the Hour of Kwong event. I'm not really vibing with it, unfortunately. Bunny felt like a fever dream, but it also felt like an active fever dream that I was fully involved in and fully a part of emotionally. And Rouge doesn't feel like that. It just feels like a messy fever dream, and I'm not really sure what the protagonist is doing or like who she's talking to and what's real, and I'm just not super invested or really know what's going on. So it's not going great, unfortunately, with my read of Rouge, but it may pick up again. Yeah, I'm going to take it with me again tonight because I have yet another author event tonight, this time for Manchester Literature Festival. This is for Daisy Johnson and Andrew, why have I forgotten his name? Andrew Michael Hurley, I think his name is, author of Starvaker. I've like binge read like a bunch of his books this week and then read some of Daisy Johnson's because I hadn't actually read any of her stuff before. And I'm a little sad because unfortunately Andrew Hurley's books are just a 3-star for me in general. They're not bad, but they're not going to stick with me. So I think I am taking all 3 books I have of his. I have The Loney, I have Starvaker, obviously, because I'd already read that one, and I have Devil's Day. And if they're doing signings, I'm going to get them all signed, but I think I'm only going to keep Starvaker, and I'm going to gift the other 2. And I wanted to read more Daisy Johnson because I read Sisters and I loved it. So I've got a copy of Sisters with me because I give that a 5-star. I loved it so much. And then I read her debut short story collection, I think it was, called Fen, and I wasn't crazy on it, but there was definitely like potential that I could see that her stuff was really good. But I'm really intrigued about her new book, The Hotel. So I'm hoping, this is at Manchester Central Library where the Jacqueline Wilson event was, and they did sell some books there, so I'm hoping they'll have some copies of her new book there that I can pick up. So yeah, still think it's going to be a really interesting event and I'm looking forward to it. I just kind of wish that I had loved Andrew Michael Hurley's books as much as I like Starvaker, but it is what it is, really. Hello, coming at you a weird angle here because I just don't have very good lighting at the moment. It's very early in the morning before I go to work. But I finished Rouge yesterday and I feel pretty mixed about it, to be honest. I think overall this wasn't great. It had some really good ideas and I could very much see what the author was trying to do. But execution-wise, I think it was just too vague, too fever-dreamy. Like, I love the idea of it being fever-dreamy because our main character is going through this experience and it's like changing her and she doesn't really know what's happening. But it was almost too much that, as a reader, it was hard to really know exactly what was happening until near the end. And I will say, however, that for me, the ending did save it a little bit. Not enough for me to give it a higher rating, unfortunately. But I did really enjoy the ending for this book. I thought it was thematically kind of perfect. And I enjoyed where it went. It was definitely not as good for me as Bunny. I think it's a low 3 overall. I would rate it slightly lower than Holly because even though I had a lot of issues with the themes that happened in Holly, I at least was able to follow it a lot better and the writing was still good, whereas even though the writing was good in this at times, it wasn't good consistently, I don't think. And yeah, the pacing and just how it was telling the story just didn't really work for me at all. And I could see how it could work for some people, and I feel like it would have worked for me normally, but it just did not. A little unfortunate. I can understand now why this hasn't been getting great reviews. But I would still read more from Mona Howard. I think this one is just kind of a swing and a miss. I am going to be starting my final horror book today, which is A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. Another one that I've heard kind of mixed reviews about, so I'm a little bit worried now that I'm not even going to enjoy any of these horror books. But fingers crossed, I will enjoy the T. Kingfisher one. We'll see. Otherwise, this whole horror genre, I picked the wrong books basically from the category. Enjoy the Halloween decorations. I have a horror book update. I have started reading A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. I've actually been listening to it via audiobook because I'm doing a trial of BookBeat and they happen to have it on there, so I thought I'd try it out on there. It's not the best narrator, but it is easy to listen to. I am like an hour and a half in at the moment, not massively far into the book itself, as you can see. So I'm currently about 60 pages in, about to hit chapter 5 or 6 or something. I'm enjoying it so far. It's not particularly creepy yet. It is kind of giving me cozy horror domestic vibes so far. So basically our main character, whose name I do not remember, but she's an etymologist. So basically she is obsessed with bugs and that is kind of like her study, which makes a lot of sense now about why there's all these like ladybugs and stuff on this. I also think there's a bunch of insects under the dust jacket on this special edition. So I like her quite a lot. She's basically just staying with her mum for a little bit in like their old family home. Her brother's been worried about her mother and wanted her to check in, and then like a study field trip thing like fell through, so she kind of needs somewhere to stay for a little bit, so she goes to her mum's. So we've met her mum and her mum seems all right. Like she seems a bit worried about her because she's kind of thin. And she's like redecorated the house to be very bland and boring, whereas it was really colourful before. So she's picking up on stuff being off with her mum, but her mum seems okay in terms of her personality. So nothing else. We've seen the vulture. The vulture was there right from the get-go, but it hasn't really done anything yet. Her mother's just like, oh yeah, these vultures that like live at this tree down the way kind of thing, and doesn't seem worried about it. Did find out a fun vulture fact. Apparently when vultures get upset, they puke. So I didn't know that, now I know. And at the moment our main character, her mother is away working because she does like babysitting clients that come in for events, I think. So her mum's away at a hotel and at the moment our character is just alone in the house and there's not very much signal, but she's like finding it a little bit creepy, but I don't think it's really overly bothering her so much. So I am enjoying it so far, but at the moment there is nothing particularly creepy going on, but I imagine that will hopefully change soon. Hello, next update, because I have indeed finished A House of Good Bones. It took me a couple of days to read this, and I was alternating between the audiobook and the physical book. I did like the audiobook, but I think how the narrator kind of spoke as the main character, I preferred like my own sort of interpretation of it when I was reading it. But overall, I actually really enjoyed this. I would give this a 4-star. I'm not sure if it's a low to a high, so this does mean it is the horror book I've enjoyed the most of the 3 that I picked for this genre. However, with the caveat, I will say that this definitely got more horror towards the end, but there was a lot of this book that wasn't really horror, to be honest. Like, there was a lot of humour, there was a lot of relatability with the characters, and a lot of just like almost slice of life stuff, I suppose, as well. Like, the horror did build, and it did genuinely go somewhere that got quite horrifying, I suppose, and I did really enjoy where that went. But it took a while to get there, I would say. But overall, I did really enjoy my time with this. But would I have picked it as the best horror? Probably not. Like, I enjoyed it for what it was, and I feel like you have to really enjoy the style of how this book is. The character voice, how there is a lot of humour to the main character, and it's less about being really scary. But it does get to the scares, it does really do them well. There is a lot of, like, I guess, body horror kind of stuff with what it is that you see. And like with most other T. Kingfisher books, to be honest, I really enjoy the characters in this. I love how she often makes like older women be actually important to the plot and how things are going and stuff. I did like Sam, even though I know some people really don't like the main character, particularly because they say she kind of falls into this trope of like the comedy best friend fat girl, I guess. Like, she is overweight, and she says it herself, but it's not anything that she feels bad about herself. I feel like I really enjoyed her as a character, and I feel like even though it made a point about her weight at times, mostly because of what her grandma thought about her, like, it's very obvious that Sam does not give a shit, and that it doesn't really affect her life in any way at all. Like, she is perfectly happy and is still able to do everything. Overall, did really enjoy this. Let me just bring up the other Goodreads books quickly, because I'm trying to remember if I read any others from this category. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, I feel like, again, I picked the wrong ones. It's kind of how I feel. Like, I really feel like I probably should have picked up the Reformatory for this. I maybe should have took a chance on some of the authors that I have not read from before, because obviously Rouge was a bit of a miss for me. I would say Rouge was maybe the most horror in terms of where it went, and then this definitely had horror, but it took a while, and there was so much kind of offsetting it that I never really like got as scared as I could have got, I feel, with this. And to me, Holly was just not scary at all. But let's have a look at the other ones and I'll see what I think. So looking at what we have here, I'm actually really torn about whether I rate Holly or Rouge lower, to be honest, because Holly I found not at all scary and kind of predictable for a lot of it, very frustrating at times, and I just wasn't really invested at all in what was going on. Like, I found it an easy read, like the writing was fine, but otherwise I can't say I care. I know I'm never going to reread it. Rouge, I feel like also kind of fits into that low 3 rating, but I think more of it has stuck with me. It's just unfortunate that I basically didn't like the whole middle of the book, but the ending I really did enjoy. So I think they're both on a similar par for me in a low 3. House of Good Bones then, which was the 3rd place in the Goodreads, I am rating a lowish 4. Really enjoyed it. Would actually definitely pick this one up again. Interestingly, the 2nd place book, which I have also read, which is Grady Hendrix's How to Sell a Haunted House, very similar in theme with these 2 books, but I think this book did it better, I've got to say. It had some wild moments in the Grady Hendrix book, but it's also not a book I would see myself ever going back to, whereas I could see myself going back to this book. In terms of the other books in here, I've not read any others, although I am going to be reading Monstrillia very soon in this video, so you'll see. It'll be very ironic if the book that I picked from the debut categories actually ended up being my favourite horror. But I can see it happening, to be honest, at the moment, because I think I just didn't pick well at all. Of the other books on here, I would still like to read pretty much all of them, to be honest. I would say of the ones that are left here, the ones I have higher hopes of possibly me rating higher, basically, I think would be Our Share of Night. The Reformatory, definitely. I think I probably should have picked The Reformatory. Natural Beauty, I think, probably does the beauty industry critique a lot better than Rouge has done, I'm gonna say, and I am still very interested in Lone Women and Sisters of the Lost Nation as well. Yeah, a bit of a mixed bag with the horror. I don't want to say I didn't hate any of them, but I really didn't like Holly that much. And I had such a mixed time with Rouge. So yeah, a little bit of a shame because I was obviously really excited because this is like one of my genres, but yeah, I did not pick the best options here. But that's it with the horror, I guess. A final rating, I guess, will say lowest rating. Gonna put Holly because I'm sorry, being boring is worse than being confusing. How to Sell a Haunted House, actually, I put after Holly because at least it was still doing something more interesting. Rouge, and then A House of Good Bones, I think, is the highest rating, but no 5 stars, which I'm disappointed about. But next, I will be carrying on with the debuts. I did start Inkblotter's The Scribe, and I'm going to carry on with that one, and then I will get to Monstrilio. I haven't had a 5-star yet in this video, so I'm hoping one of these will at least be a 5-star. I'm really holding out for Monstrilio, not going to lie. So yeah, until the next check-in, I guess. Hello, so I realised I didn't actually really update you at all whilst I was reading Monstrilio. I read this in like 3 days. I think it was a super quick read, very much the sort of book that you wanna just keep reading it once you are like in the middle of it. Wow, my glasses are just, there we go, that's better. I have a light like right here and it was just fully shining off. And yeah, I did really like this, with the caveat that I also have some really mixed feelings about it. I really wanted this to be a 5-star. Anyone that doesn't know, this is basically about grief for a lot of this book. It is about this couple called Maho and Joseph, and their 11-year-old son dies. He was always like quite ill health, but yeah, he dies at the start of this book, and Maho, the mother, basically takes a piece of his lung, puts it in a jar, and then goes away and like goes back to her old like family home in Mexico. She finds out from this housekeeper essentially that there was someone else that did something similar, and they grew a man from the piece of flesh. So she basically feeds the lump of lung, and it starts to grow and it becomes this creature which eventually gets called Monstrilio, which is very much more of like a feral sort of creature. Initially, the story is actually split into 4 parts, which I did like. So we follow 4 different perspectives. So we start off with Maho, then we follow Lena, who is like her best friend, also in love with her. A bit of a time skip actually after Lena, and then we follow Joseph, and then finally we actually do see things from Monstrilio's perspective. I really wanted to love this book. The writing is gorgeous. The idea of it, the themes and stuff are something I found really interesting. The grief is not as prevalent as I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be a very difficult book to read because of that emphasis on grief, and actually it doesn't take up a whole lot of the book's emotional runtime. I would say it's very much more about the consequences of what happens with Monstrilio and how these 3 people essentially are kind of raising Monstrilio to be what he becomes. I think what kind of made this book fall for me, and not, it's still a high rating, I would say. I think I would give this like a low 4, maybe going up to a mid 4 on a reread perhaps. I'm not entirely sure, but I think the issue is that I found both of the main 2 parents, Maho and Joseph, I found both of their storylines really frustrating. I outright hated Maho, to be honest. I did somewhat like Joseph, but I found him also to be very frustrating. He is very much somebody who is not great at communicating. He struggles with a lot of things. He is basically like team morality, whereas Maho is team no morality whatsoever. And the antithesis between them doesn't really work that well, I think. So I really enjoyed Lena's point of view. I thought her point of view was kind of like the outsider who is still more intrinsically linked up with this like family to be really interesting. I really enjoyed her character. I thought she was very interesting, so I liked her part. I really liked when we finally got to actually see M's point of view, Monstrilio's point of view. I think that made a lot of sense to me. I wish we kind of got that a lot earlier, but I understand we got it as late as we did because of where the storyline goes. But I think for me, I just really found Maho and Joseph's storyline really frustrating. I found their point of view very frustrating. Maho I outright hated. Joseph was okay, but I still found him quite frustrating in terms of how he keeps a lot of things from people, and it's just kind of ruining his relationships essentially. So yeah, a bit of a mixed one, I think. I honestly think I have kind of similar feelings coming out of this as I did with Shark Heart's story. In fact, I think I'm rating them exactly the same, and I think I have basically the same kind of issue in that I love parts of this book. I love the writing, I love the themes, I love the whole storyline idea behind it, and there are just parts of the perspectives that lost me. So like with Shark Heart, we kind of like switched perspective totally halfway through the book. We went on a totally different storyline, and that storyline was fine, but I didn't enjoy it in terms of the context of the whole book as a whole. It lost me for the second half of the book because I really thoroughly enjoyed the first half of that book, and then I didn't really enjoy the middle, and I think it got me back again a little bit at the end, but there were things that kind of lost me because of that. And again, it's a similar kind of feeling I think I have with this. I really wanted to love this. I could see how this could have been a 5-star for me, but I think those two perspectives I just did not like the characters enough. I sympathize with them, don't get me wrong, and I could kind of see where they were coming from, but I didn't necessarily agree with where they were coming from. And yeah, I found them both in each of their own ways to be very frustrating. So it's a shame because I really wanted to love this. But I think I would definitely pick up more books by this author if he writes more books, because I think his writing is beautiful. I think the whole story plotline structure is really well done. I really enjoyed some of the themes that we went through. I really enjoyed Monstrilio and Lena as characters. I just really didn't like Maho and Joseph, unfortunately. So yeah, that is my thoughts, I guess, on this one. I am currently halfway through the final book, Blood Sister Scribe, and right now I've got to say it might be the winner. But I've enjoyed all 3 books so far. It could totally 180 me, and I'll hate the second half of Inklet Sister Scribe. But at the moment, the storyline and the themes, I think, of both Shark Heart and Monstrilio are more imaginative and more original than Inklet Sister Scribe. But so far, in terms of enjoyment level, and me liking all of the characters, me liking where the plot line is going completely, me being super invested emotionally, I'm more so with Inklet Sister Scribe, which is a surprise because it's much more of a standard fantasy, and as I said, not as original, not as weird and crazy, which is usually right up my alley, like Shark Heart, like Monstrilio. But I think I'm just invested more in the characters and the storyline. So at the moment, Inklet is winning, but we'll see, because I still have a whole half book yet to get through. So when you'll see me again, you will see my final update of what I thought about Inklet Sister Scribe and what the final ratings are. So today is an editing day because I am so behind on my editing that I haven't even got most of this one like edited yet, and this is the last book I'm reading for it. Plus I have to also upload my wrap up for September and October and my TBR video for December. So today is going to be an editing day. However, I did manage to get just over halfway through last night on Books and Lala's 10-year anniversary sprint. I am determined to finish this today, because then that means I can fully finish this video and crack on with the next month of Goodreads, because I'm a month behind. So I'm pretty sure I can make it. This has been a really fun read, by the way. I'm really enjoying this book, even though I hate the title. But yeah, I'm having a great time with the book itself. It's a very easy read. I'm really enjoying all the characters and the storylines. That's the mini update so far, I guess, on Ink Plus as described. So we are going to ignore the fact that this is actually not October by the time I finally got to the last book in this video. It's actually the end of November. I got really behind, so I'm doing like my November and December books basically in December now. But I did last night finally finished the last book for this vlog, which was Inkblood, Sis Described. I read this in 2 days, and thankfully it was a really easy read to do that with. I was like super invested into it, and overall I would say I really enjoyed this book. Rating wise, I think it's a mid-4. It's not quite a 5, because I feel like there were some plot points that I probably would have liked to have just seen a little more like completed. There's definitely some scope here for there being like a sequel, I think, although I feel like this is supposed to be a standalone book. But overall, I just had a really good time with this book. It was just a really solid fantasy. It honestly gave me vibes of the Book of Doors, what with the whole like magical books that are dangerous and people are after them kind of thing, and like the shady organization that's trying to get them. I honestly had a really good time with it, and although if I have to be objective, this is like not the best fantasy book I've ever read. It's not a 5-star. It didn't give me like that, oh my god, wow, this is like one of the best things I've ever read. I did overall enjoy my reading experience with it, more so than I did with the other 2 debuts, even though I kind of had assumed, because the other 2 debuts are so like original and they've got so many cool ideas and stuff, and they're more like up my weird alley that I like, that I would have preferred them. I think that the rating wise they're all very close. I mean, I did give the others also a 4-star, just a lower 4-star. But overall, yeah, like, I was definitely put off by the title of this book, but it was really solid and I really, really enjoyed it. I would definitely pick up more by this author. I don't believe she's written anything else at the current time, but I will be looking out for her, because this was just, in terms of like being well written, in terms of having really solid characters who had really solid character arcs, who were really likable, having a good plot as well. I really liked how a lot of this book was set in different places, even though like our main character Joanna was always in one place. But then with Nicholas and with Esther, who are other 2 characters, we get to go to different places, particularly because obviously when we first start this book, Esther is in Antarctica, which is not a place you get to see very often in books in general. So I really liked that. I liked how they all kind of met up, how they kind of formed like a sort of a bond in their little group. And yeah, I thought it had some really good twists in it as well as also being a lot about family, which I liked. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more interaction between the sisters, but they were just kind of on a time crunch at that point in time. So I feel like there was definitely stuff that needed to be aired out, but overall, really solid. So in terms of my debut books then, rating wise, gosh, which did I like more? So I haven't actually read any other books in the debut category other than these 3, although Wayward did win, but I am reading this next. I've actually just started it, funnily enough, so I might kind of like do a little retrospect once I actually do the historical novels to see if I think this actually was the better winner for debut as well. But of the 3 I've read, 2 of these I only have physically, but I do think that Shark Heart is probably the lowest, if only just. I don't know if I would ever pick up Shark Heart to read again, whereas I think I probably would pick up Monstrilio again, because I think I could get more out of it and like understand the perspectives a little bit more, even though I did find them kind of frustrating. So both Monstrilio and Shark Heart are a 4.25 for me. So Shark Heart is the lowest, then we have Monstrilio, and then at the top with a 4.5 we have Inkblood Sister Scribe. So really shockingly, the results of this video is that I think I liked debut more than I liked horror. I had not a great time with horror, which is really surprising. I really picked the wrong books from that category. I do think there are books in that category that could be really good for me and maybe could have given me 5 stars or at least matched up to debut. But like, I didn't really like Holly. Rouge was just kind of a miss for me, even though I loved Bunny. And the only one I really enjoyed was The House of Good Bones, and it didn't really give me as much scary vibes as I was kind of wanting from it. Like, T. Kingfisher is really good at writing cozy slice of life stuff alongside her horror and fantasy. I see her horror as more kind of cozy horror to me, basically. Like, it's got more of a chill vibe to it than I think other horrors do. So yeah, I guess the answer then for this video is that debut won. I mean, obviously it's hard to call debut a genre because debut is literally any genre. Like for this, I ended up reading 1 fantasy, 1 horror, which, yeah, I would say I liked Monstrilio as a horror more than I liked Holly and more than I liked Rouge, I think. Although probably on par with Rouge. I almost want to say, I feel like I had mixed feelings about both. And then obviously the final debut I read was like a literary fiction with like magical realism elements. So there's such a variety, and I'm actually quite interested in reading more from this category, to be honest, because I think there's some really solid debuts out there. Like, not one of these 3 debuts I read were bad. They were all really solid, and I could very much see how with other books these authors would just get better and better and better as they improve their craft. So yeah, that is it for this video. The next video should be coming very soon because this one is so late, basically. I'm already halfway through reading the books for the next video, which is going to be historical versus humour, which has been mixed so far. I'll say humour is not my genre, and interestingly, it's also a genre that has now been scrapped in the Goodreads Awards. As always, until next time, stay safe, stay cozy, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!